Welcome to the Viking Age podcast, the official podcast of thevikingage.com. My name is Chris Schad. I write for the Viking Age Zone Coverage, Bring Me the News, and the Brookings Register. We do this every week with a late week episode right here on the Viking Age YouTube channel. We're also in podcast form on Apple and Spotify the very next day. But however you consume us, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe so you never miss a new episode and we can spread the word to the masses. Today's show, you see him on your screen if you're watching on YouTube. He is Tom Schreier, managing editor of Zone Coverage. We're going to discuss this stretch of games coming up. We're going to preview Sunday's game against the Jaguars. But first, we need to talk about this trade deadline because the Minnesota Vikings, they basically stayed pat at the trade deadline. Of course, they made two trades before Tuesday afternoon, acquiring Cam Akers and Cam Robinson. There were no Cams to be left to be acquired, I should say. But my sources told someone's sources who heard from their sources that the Vikings went big game hunting, but they couldn't come out with a deal. Kevin O'Connell also told KFAN's Paul Allen that acquiring Cam Robinson would be one of the biggest moves they've ever made while they've been here. So I guess there was some action. It wasn't just at the debt like that 11th hour, whoa type of move. What did you think of the Vikings deadline? And, did it improve this team in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just wrote about this, how their biggest trade deadline deal was actually not at the deadline. You could make an argument for Robinson, and I'm not shocked that Kwesi was aggressive. We know that he is. It goes back to the first draft, which is maligned at this point, but also just what he's done even in the most recent draft, right? Trading up for McCarthy, granted like one spot, but then trading up again for Turner. I think he sees this as a win now window. He saw it as a win now window last year when they were 0-2, 0-3. The Akers pickup to me was huge. I mean, I think just Aaron Jones is driving more offense than I think maybe appreciated for, both in the catching game, but obviously in the running game. We saw the drop off to Ty Chandler. Akers kind of splits the middle, right? I don't think he's Aaron Jones, but Chandler's a good athlete. I just think in terms of kind of understanding the scheme, and even like pass blocking stuff, he just isn't a guy you want to rely on as the only backup. And then the Robinson thing, going out and getting a guy who has experience. It's very funny that like, it was clear the Jaguars just gave up on their season. Like, here, you can have them. And this is the opponent coming up. But, I think those are two savvy moves. You could probably make an argument for the Robinson move. I just haven't seen enough. And part of me goes like, man, you probably could have. He's not Darisaw, right? They're using like receivers to chip, running backs to chip, occasionally pairing him with a guard, right? To prevent the defense from coming in. So like, regardless, I like those two moves. I don't, at some point, you don't want to give up too much. I don't even know if they can, right? You're looking at a team, right, with the first rounder, 2 fifths, and then you think you're getting a compensatory third, right? There's not a lot of draft capital. I mean, you'd be stealing from like 2 years out if you really want to make a trade. And that I'm just, and we'll get into this. We're in kind of the part of the schedule where you're in like, go out and win these games, man. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not taking away. If you don't listen, if you lose in Jacksonville, you go like, they just didn't take them seriously enough, right? And they weren't preparing right during the week. I mean, that's a separate problem. But I understand the Arizonas, if you let them hang around, they'll beat you. I understand Kirk, I guess, can enact revenge if you let him. I don't think Atlanta's very good. I even think looking later into the schedule, teams like Seattle, like that's a winnable game, right? Even though it's in Seattle, even though that's been a tough place, traditionally for the Vikings to win. But really, like, to me, I think you're gearing up, trying to pick up as many wins as you can. Keep the Packers and the Lions within range, and then you'll test yourself against them late in the season.
And I think the other thing, it can go both ways. Like, the joke is full Rams, right? That's like Kwesi's origin story. Like, you don't want to go full Rams and like trade all your draft picks and do all that. And I don't think this was a situation where the Vikings should go full Rams because you have JJ McCarthy coming. Yeah, you have $75 million in cap space, but you probably need some corners next offseason. You probably need interior defensive linemen next season. You probably need some other things next season. You can't just all go get them in free agency. And by the way, a lot of times in free agency, yeah, there are some players that maybe, hey, they can't afford to keep this guy. He's really good. Kind of the Jonathan Grenard thing. But there's also, buyer beware in free agency where you sign a Marcus Davenport and he doesn't really do much for you. Those things can happen in free agency. So keeping your draft capital is a good thing. I still have some questions about this team after the trade deadline, and there are some concerns I feel like they didn't fill. One of them is the interior defensive line. Harrison Phillips, Jerry Tillery, and Jonathan Bullard have combined for 26 pressures this season. Jonathan Menard Bullard only has 4 of them. I'm thinking of Jonathan Grenard, but yes.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have the ammo to go get Dexter Lawrence, and I totally understand that. But after seeing the Colts completely wreck a game to the point where Chris Collinsworth called DeForest Buckner, Grover Stewart, and Kwity Paye the triangle of terror during the broadcast.
Yeah.
It would be nice to, as I've called it, have a badass shit wrecker in the middle of that defensive line.
Yeah, no, and I understand that. I don't know what the cost was to get that. I also, going back to free agency and kind of looking at, I think what we found is there's just some misunderstandings about what players can offer on the defense. We understand like the value of a shutdown corner or maybe even it's like a safety or something. But I think why people thought this team was going to be bad is they didn't think Cashman, Van Ginkel, and Grenard were enough. I think Grenard's a little misunderstood. I think he's good at a lot of things and not great at one thing, and so he will not rack up stats. But as far as I know, he's a pretty sound player. You know what I mean? Splash plays and kind of the fundamental plays. Obviously, you see Van Ginkel with the splash plays. Like he's a perfect fit for this defense, and we know what happened when Cashman got the turf toe. I guess he toughed it out. He got it in the second quarter, I think, against the Jets, and he hasn't seen the field since. All of a sudden, it opens up the middle of the field, right? So the thing, yes, you did not have the upgrade this year. I think they can get by with it. I mean, it does not seem like, aside from Detroit, which I think the one thing, if you look at that 5-day span, right, the 2 losses, Detroit, not only are you going in that without Cashman, but that Ben Johnson is someone who will figure out how the defense works, right? Like how Flores' defense works and how to exploit it. And I think the defensive players are pretty honest. I think Flores would say this too. There's holes in the defense. It's by design. It sounds weird, but it's like if you're sending all those guys on a blitz, naturally you're not going to have people, in the backfield. And we learned that the kind of send 6, drop 8 system doesn't work. At some point, someone figures it out. Now everyone's kind of using the Zach Taylor model, right? It's use dagger, attack the middle of the field. And then, when the blitz is coming, attack the flats, right? That's where players aren't. I actually think like Detroit and LA did it differently. It seemed like Detroit was more attacking the middle. I think LA was actually attacking the flats a little more. Regardless, I do think the defensive system works. I think there's more talent on defense. I think it matters that Cashman is coming back. Harrison Smith can still give you enough. Obviously, you're probably looking at like how you replace the Gilmore role. That's a really hard role to replace, right? But I think my point here is I think the defense is good enough this year to kind of tread water. That really it takes extraordinary offensive minds and talent to exploit it. That being what Detroit has going on with Ben Johnson, right? And then Sean McVay looking at that model going, I'm getting the same team on Thursday, right? And I'm getting 2 receivers back. And I'm going to kind of look at what Ben Johnson did and fix it. I think if the Colts had beaten up on him, I would have said, that's, for obvious reasons, that's a problem. I understand their coach is probably plenty smart. Joe Flacco can run the offense on time. What we found is the statue quarterback, the guy well past his prime, cannot beat the Vikings. The Vikings functionally beat themselves, I think, in the first half, kind of corrected, whatever issues they had enough to win the game. And really during this stretch, like, yes, a Cousins probably would know what to do. I mean, he was in the building. He's good enough, right? But Cousins is more Joe Flacco now at this stage in his career than he is Jared Goff or Matt Stafford, right? And so I'm not saying there's not reason for concern. I think the defense is good enough. And I always remind people, we're learning right now how good the special teams infrastructure will be, right? Because they don't have the kicker and long snapper.
Mm-hmm.
But we know Will Reichert healthy. He looks legit. I would believe in him more than Blair Walsh. I would believe in him as much as Daniel Carlson, but he doesn't have Mike Zimmer coaching him, right? And I think, so you have that. And then you have a franchise quarterback. And what we've learned in the last 2 years is O'Connell can patch something together. I mean, at some point, Josh Dobbs just is not a good downfield thrower. And if you contain him in the pocket, he can't beat you. And Jaron Hall doesn't have enough. Nick Mullins doesn't have enough. Mullins taking too many risks. Hall probably too safe and just not as physically gifted as other quarterbacks in the league. But you take Sam Darnold. Darnold has a few great qualities, right? Arm strength, flushes everything. He makes the worst interceptions in the world, right? And he just does not phase him, right? And he has good pocket presence. And I think what O'Connell has done is accentuate that. And what he's hoping for is, hey, man, maybe he does that weird rollout thing. Dobbs could do it because he was athletic enough, but instead of Darnold just throwing the ball away, he will try to roll away from the pocket and away from the defenders and get hit. And then I think the other thing is he's probably on tape going, you got to know where Fred Warner is. You got to see two defenders in front against the Colts. Like, you got to see two defenders against whoever is throwing in front of, because like both those guys could have picked the ball. He's got to be more aware in kind of that second tier of the defense where the linebacker is. But I think if O'Connell can do this with Darnold, he should be able to do it with a handpicked quarterback who, granted, is kind of a jack of all trades, probably at best is a high-end system quarterback, right? I guess we don't know, but I think that's what McCarthy is. But this is his handpicked guy, and he's taking him from the ground level up. There's no baggage. There's no Jets. There's no Carolina like you have with Darnold, and he's certainly more talented than the quarterbacks they had last year, including probably Kirk Cousins. I don't know. I mean, that's the big question. But if he did this with Cousins, if he did it with the Dobbs or the Dobbs trio, whatever you want to see that last year, and then did it with Darnold, and those are what I'm telling people right now. If the Vikings can take care of the business this year and kind of see how far they could go with this current iteration, they should get marginally better next year, or maybe even meaningfully, because Reichert should be healthy. You have the franchise quarterback, and it does seem like Flores, assuming he's still here, can identify. He'll find a nose tackle no one knows who he is and be like, yeah, that was the right guy. And I think that's just, he sees the tape, he understands defense at another level.
That's the last thing. I think the last time they had like a truly dominant defensive tackle was Linval Joseph. And when he was signed, when he was signed in 2014, everybody was kind of like, who the hell is that? And then he winds up being a linchpin of that 2017 defense that, was so dominant. You mentioned the field goal unit a little bit, and I want to touch on that. Our tribal chief, Will Reichert, is on injured reserve right now. Sadly, he's out for the next 4 games. I'm not worried about him. I still remember Dallas Turner saying, I trust him with my life. He's a cold-blooded sniper. I think all those things are true because he's been really good. I think the biggest loss in the present is Andrew DePaula, a 3-time Pro Bowler, a former All-Pro. According to Lindsey Young, Vikings.com, he apparently has a incredible bagel shop.
He does, in Maryland or wherever he's from, I think. Yeah.
It's like a really big deal, actually. So outside of bagels in the locker room, how concerned are you about this special teams unit right now?
Yeah, I mean, DePaula, I think the special teams is really interesting. It's just hard to write about because it tends to be something, certainly with the snapper, but even with the kicker, you kind of focus on when you don't. When they mess up, it's just unfortunate. But I think like I'll go Reichert, then DePaula, then kind of look at the Matt Daniels, the special teams guy. Like with Reichert, I have talked to him a lot, even just going to London, being like, how did the grass affect you? You're talking slippery grass. It's weird. That Tottenham Stadium is actually built for football, as in they'd like move the surface that they play soccer on, and underneath it is a football surface. And then also there's locker rooms big enough for football teams, which are bigger than soccer teams. And he was saying, it doesn't have like the little, they look like tire, like chopped up tires, You see that when the guy drags his feet, you see it pop out of the grass. Like, I guess it didn't have that. And then like, there's, you think of like Green Bay is always tough. Chicago is typically tough. Like, and I think Reichert, not only, he's a funny dude. He looks like a kid. Like he looks like a high school kid kind of.
Yes.
And he is like, that dude is like locked in kind of at all times, but he's also, again, it feels like when Josh Metellus was talking to him, I was like, it feels like he's talking to like a coach's kid or so, you know what I mean? Like, it's just it's such a funny, and Metellus is a relatively young person who has like a young people energy, right? You know what I mean? He's friendly and bubbly or whatever. And like, it's just so funny that I'm thinking will the throw come in and kind of whatever, like, but those guys, I think they know as much as, like the kicker is such a different position in football than certainly the guys on the line or even the skill guys. Like they appreciate him for his mentality. And I do think he's probably just wired differently. I mean, and I think that's where the level of concern came when he started missing kicks. I don't understand. The hard thing is like the timeline gets jumbled because like we didn't know he was hurt, so no one was tracking it. But apparently he practiced, I guess, Wednesdays and Fridays. They kick a lot. You actually see, like I've seen him even because the media comes in obviously after practice. I've seen him after practice booming kicks. By the way, in an empty, like, I'm trying to think of how to describe their facility, but it's like high ceilings and it's a big, it houses a full, like football field.
Yeah.
It's like a terrifying sound. You know what I mean? It's like because he just put so much, pressure on the ball. But guys putting in the work. Now I get it. Like, I think it's really hard as a kicker, especially when you don't just have like a backup sitting around being like, yeah, my leg's kind of sore. But he claims it didn't affect it, like the kicking. He may have just hit the 51. It's just like, I think it was 51 yards. Anything within that 50 range feels like his range. They were really like kind of sketchy about how far he could kick, but we learned after that the Detroit game went, they would have sent him out for 68 yards. 73 is beyond his range. I believe his range is 70 or like high 60s.
They
right?
should have tried the 73 though, right?
But the reason why they didn't, and I think this is worth noting, and again, I just know this because I just wrote about this and kind of put it together. They were worried about a groin injury. Now, this is Matt Daniels saying this, not O'Connell. And I think it's just naturally, they're trying to tell these guys kick the same all the time, meaning obviously you probably take a little bit off. Like you could probably kick it a little higher and a little less hard if you're in closer. But they basically just want to be like, every kick is the same. It's hard, right? It's the same instruction you give a basketball player. Every free throw is the same. And you're like, well, it feels different, dude, if we lose the game and I clank one, right? But like, it doesn't feel like the second quarter, you know what I mean, against Charlotte or whatever. But like, I think I think, it just was weird. And I remember John Krasinski tweeted, I laughed at the tweet. He was like, hey, Reichert's just getting this out of the way so he doesn't do it, in the NFC Championship. I actually don't think, aside from the physical adversity, I do worried about that. And I don't know if he would be available against Atlanta. I think that's week 14 would be the most recent. I don't know if he'll be available then. I don't certainly don't wish like the physical side on him. But I actually think from a mental standpoint, chunking a kick is not, especially in a relatively low stakes game, they should always, they were favored by 5 against Indianapolis. Like, not a bad thing just to kind of face the adversity. It's just when then it's like 31 yards, it's off the upright. He claims that it didn't affect his kicks. He's saying it's the PAT after that he started to feel it. And that is actually when he started wrapping it. You saw, I'm sure everyone saw it on the camera, and then we, looked down on the bench. He was wrapping his leg, his quad, I believe, with like some sort of thing. It's, and he did gut it out, I guess. But like that, that's concerning. What I'd say is, listen, they had John Parker Romo. Now, obviously there's a reason why he wasn't signed, but like they had him in camp. This is a known guy. And actually the new long snapper, it's McQuaid, right? I think is the, so dude, think about this. He played with Matt Daniels for the St. Louis Rams. Like that's how long that guy, he's 36. Andrew Kramer, shout out to Andrew Kramer, had this in his article. I knew Matt Daniels had played, and I'll talk about him a little bit. They call him Hat because he literally, he's very charismatic, very like goofy dude. I guess he shows the guys highlights. He was like a hard hitting player. He shows highlights of him just crunching guys for like the St. Louis Rams. But like, it's great. McQuaid played for the St. Louis Rams, was with LA. So like, I'd assume McConnell is knows who he is. But I think it's, certainly the Reichert thing it's just straightforward, right? It's do they have the functionally, Parker Romo is Josh Dobbs. Like, you know what I mean? That's that. Now it's different quarterback kicker, but it is like they're bringing in a guy and Daniels has to quickly get him ready. Cause listen, they should just blow out the Jaguars and hopefully they don't have to kick much, but at some point here, you probably have to convert a kick. And it might have some stakes behind it. In terms of DePaula, I'd say like that is a guy who they like, again, you don't talk a lot about the long snapper, but I think he's pretty respected in the locker room. Like they're going to have him in meetings as soon as they can, literally just to kind of instruct players and go through film. He is, so they call him Sir Poe, right? Matt Daniels has like a nickname. He's Hat, right? Drops the hat. Ryan Wright is Mr. Wright. He has like Dan Jusena back in the day was Hot Sauce. No idea why, but that's what he called him. He calls, I'm trying to think, Reichert was briefly Striker. It was a mistake where he thought that was the name of the sniper. I'm trying to think of that. What's the movie with is Mark Wahlberg or whatever?
Yeah.
That is not, it's Swagger is that guy's name. But I was thinking Striker, like you've seen Airplane, right? The guy who lands the plane sweating it out.
Yeah.
The main character was Striker, Ted Striker, I think. And I was like, why are you comparing this? Seifert, the ESPN guy, I looked at him and I was like, after the press conference. I think it's like Tuesdays the coordinators go. And I was like, is he referencing like the guy who was sweating it? I don't know. This is, again, an old movie that people may not have seen, but he's literally sweating it out trying to land a plane. It's a spoof movie. And I was like, do you really want to compare the kicker to a guy like landing a plane full of people freaking out, or whatever? I mean, I guess, again, spoiler alert, he lands the plane. It's a comedy. You watch it for the hilarity, probably not for the plot line. But I think regardless, he's obviously Will the Thrill, right? Because he gave himself that name, I guess. And then so DePaula is Sir Poe, right? Poe would be DePaula shortened. Sir Poe is that they knighted him. They knighted him like 2 years ago. They say you can go back. It's a story. I think it's something along the lines of like Matt Daniels is trying to change the Vikings special teams one nickname at a time. I think that's my story. I was talking about it with Brian, our editor, because he wants me to do another DePaula story because this guy's cool. He's like 36, 37, wasn't in the league for a while, latched on as a long snapper. He's just a dude. I remember I asked Matt Daniels called like in passing, which again, you can't just say this in passing, during a press conference. These are live streamed. Anyone can watch them. He called him Sir Poe. And at the end, I felt weird asking, but I was like, which player is Sir Poe? And he goes, oh, that's DePaula, the long snapper. And I was like, what? Yeah, but why is he Sir Poe? And he goes, oh yeah, we knighted him. It was like Game of Thrones or House of Dragon, I think came out 2 years ago. And I think they were watching it. And so I had to ask DePaul about it. And again, it's a little weird when you've never really talked to the player, but I pull him aside. I'm like, dude, can I ask you a dumb question? And he kind of looks at me and he's like, how dumb is the question? And I was like, well, I'm going to ask you about being knighted by a special teams coordinator. And he was great about it. And I'm going to look back at some of the interviews and stuff, but he is, I mean, obviously they love him. I think, he is a veteran guy who's been around football a long time. Also, it's a really hard job where obviously Jefferson has a drop. You go, what the hell happened? It's almost like kind of jarring, right? But you also expect Justin Jefferson may occasionally drop a pass in double coverage, right? This guy always has a pretty similar situation, right? He's not the kicker converting from deep. His snap is always pretty much the same. And people are only going to focus on him if he messes up. And he is a Pro Bowler. Like, he was at the Pro Bowl. He's one of the best players at that. Replacing 2/3 of that unit, again, it goes back to this is kind of their Josh Dobbs moment. Like, I hesitate to use that as a full-fledged analogy because it is a quarterback versus special teams, but they need this to work. And I get they should get their guys back. I assume DePaul is going to be out longer because it looked like he hurt his hand, but these things happen. It's rare with kickers, right? They're protected and it's just a different position. But I think DePaul I think he got injured making a tackle, right? So it's part of his job. I will say this, there's not going to be a lot of focus on Matt Daniels. I think Alec Lewis for The Athletic profiled him a while ago. It's worth it. I would say anyone who's really into football and wants depth, I go to the press conferences almost regularly. Now, half the time I sit there and take notes and stuff, but with the coordinators, because they actually will kind of teach you the ins and outs within reason. Obviously, I don't want to give away the game plan, but Wes Phillips, obviously third generation guy, that's Bum Phillips and Wade Phillips, right? So the old Houston Oilers back in the day and the Dallas Cowboys. He is the offensive coordinator, came over from LA. And then you obviously have Flores, who's pretty famous at this point within NFL circles. And then Matt Daniels, to me, seems like head coach material. I don't know if that's in the cards. He's relatively young. I think he is a year older than me. But he is, special teams guys tend to get unique opportunities because they work with offensive defensive players. He helped develop Josh Metellus. He is kind of in the very origins of developing players because that's where you start with special teams. He will have a hand in Dallas Turner's fate because that is part of his role, right? Is doing special teams. And that's something he obviously had never done before. He was always a star going back to Alabama, going back to, I believe he grew up in South Florida. I think Matt Daniels, his player development and just the way he thinks about this, he understands players don't want to be on special teams. He makes it seem like a big deal for them to be on special teams. And I think this is a moment for him. Just now, some people are out on O'Connell, but to me, O'Connell showed us, as I was saying before, because he can manage Josh Dobbs, honestly, because he can manage Kirk Cousins, because he can manage Darnold, he should be able to develop his own quarterback and at least run a pretty efficient offense, right? And he's still kind of on the vanguard of play design and understanding how to attack NFL defenses. It's different stakes because O'Connell's the head coach, because it's not the quarterback, but this is kind of, I would believe, given kind of, I sit in the press conferences, I've talked to Matt Daniels a little bit. on the side. Like, he does seem to be kind of an up and coming special teams guy. He hasn't certainly done everything right, because you can find faults with the special teams, but I think he does enough right that he should be able to manage this moment. And it's so important, given the Vikings are really in don't lose territory. You really want to go into those games against the Packers and the Lions late in the season with 2 losses. And honestly, you can kind of hold your head high going, you lost to the Lions, who were pretty good, and you lost to LA, that was more at full strength. So I just think Matt Daniels is going to play a vital role. And at least for me, I do believe he can get through this without the kicker and long snapper.
The last thing that kind of concerns me, and then we can move on to Jacksonville and the schedule and all that stuff. The interior of the offensive line. And I mean, we just got done talking about how Indianapolis's interior of the defensive line nearly wrecked the game. It was because the offensive line is still playing the can he play guard game, or center for that matter now, because Garrett Bradbury is a modern marvel to physics who is 300 pounds, but blows away in a stiff breeze. Ed Ingram, too, apparently has the widest feet on the planet. If you walked around today and you did not trip on Ed Ingram's feet, you should be thankful, because apparently that is something completely unavoidable for anyone wearing a purple jersey right now. Are you good with this offensive line? Because adding Cam Robinson was a big deal. Obviously, like you said, not Darisaw, but the interior of the line feels like a bigger problem, because we've been doing this with Garrett Bradbury for a couple of years. Ed Ingram still somehow has a job, got graded very highly by Pro Football Focus on Sunday, which I don't know what happened there. And then you have Blake Brandel, who is also there, and Dalton Reisner is also waiting in the wings. So, like, what do you think of the offensive line right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a weird situation where it certainly is concerning, and yet seems better than the Vikings have had for years, right? You know what I mean? I'd say 2 things. One, most people would think about it from a O'Connell standpoint. You have to scheme differently. Like, you just can't have longer developing plays. You can play a more quick game. Like, you have receivers who can create separation. That's not just Jefferson, Addison. For a tight end, TJ Hawkinson, Naylor, raw speed. Now it tends to be kind of straight line speed, but like, those guys should be able to create enough separation that if you just need to get the ball out and compensate for the line, you can do it. Bradbury's he was drafted for a different scheme, right? It was more like a pull scheme, and like, you wanted the mobility. He looks like the smallest 300-pound man I've ever seen. And I don't know if that's like a height thing or whatever. Now, granted, we were talking about this on the one play. It looked like he just got smoked and he stepped on Ingram's feet. Ingram, you mentioned this, like, it happened in Buffalo, right? That, going back a couple of years, like, I think Cousins had tripped on him a few times and stuff. Like, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure what's going on. Obviously, they're showing loyalty to a guy they drafted a couple of years ago and has kind of that cachet of like, hey, it's the draft pick. They want him to work out. It's certainly something they should address. I don't know how much they could have done at the deadline. I think Robinson was just like, get someone in who's viable. I do think it's a good pickup. Again, as much as I argued for Akers being the big pickup through the trade, like, Robinson is, no one's gonna be Darisaw, but like, he's competent. I think the other thing is they're trying to get themselves options. Now, right now, I don't know if it means anything. ESPN lists it as Robinson, Reisner. This is going from left to the right side of the offensive line. Bradbury, Ingram, O'Neal. That to me feels better. I think Brendel like has a valuable role, because I think he can play multiple positions, but reads as backup to me. Rouse, like, development guy, backup. Feeney is the guy with the long hair and stuff. He's the backup center. Questenberry, I think if pushed into action, you could do it. I mean, they're listing him as the backup right guard. That's not an official depth chart, and I want to be a little careful with that. The Reisner thing I don't understand is I assumed he would just kind of take Ingram's spot. I don't know how long they're kind of, at some point you actually reach a point where, like, I know it's dumb, but you think about it as budgeting. Really, it's like, hey, if we're budgeting for this player, we gotta develop him, right, and give him playing time. If we don't think we're gonna extend him, like, he just becomes a guy. I mean, I think that's kind of how it works in the NFL. And I think Reisner's a funny guy that his personality is so different from an offensive lineman. Now, he's been a little more behind the scenes recently. He's not, last year he was kind of a character coming in, right? Everyone kind of knew him from Twitter. There was all this kind of confusion over like, why are they pushing all in when they're 0-2 or whatever? He comes in that atmosphere at the same time as Akers roughly. But he has a big personality for an offense line. Some of these guys like Questenberry, I think, was shocked to get media attention, basically, when this is before the Robinson thing. I think Robinson comes off as pretty smart, kind of like a savvy veteran, right? But that he's not like a big outgoing personality. Bradbury maybe chummy or whatever, but like Reisner probably benefits in some ways from being a somewhat public figure, at least relative to offensive linemen. I think what they're trying to figure out is if Ingram's part of your long-term plans, you got to keep playing him. Like you have to, their hope is that eventually clicks. I don't know if it will, but I'm just saying that's how organizations think. The other thing is it's a trade-off, and I just don't understand it between Reisner is good against the pass and bad against the run. That's how PFF grades him. That's kind of how that's understood. It's the opposite with Ingram. I think Ingram's actually a really good run blocker and struggles against the pass. What I don't get is even though they have Aaron Jones, like Aaron Jones, part of his value is like he can go out and run a route. You know what I mean? He is exceptional as a running back catching the ball. And then he's dynamic as a back. I think he just chooses the right pathway, right? And I think, he's a little bit of a bulldog. I always go like, man, if you see him physically, you can look up his height. He is physically smaller than it seems because he plays big. You know what I mean? And we see it with the shiftiness and whatnot. I mean, it's the way you kind of survive as long as he has in the NFL. But like I understand the value of it. We saw it with Alexander Madison. You can't just plug in a kind of a guy, right? I don't think they could just plug in Akers and be like, yeah, he's just a starter, right? That he is a viable backup. And we see kind of how things break down if you don't have Chandler. But I don't know why they prioritize the run game when, if anything, they should run more. I mean, that when Darnold threw the interception, the second one against Indy, the first one was his fault. Like, just throw that ball away. Live for another down. You're very close to the end zone, right? That's just trusting the arm strength too much or whatever, or just not seeing guys downfield. But like the second one, I was like, hey, so you just ran a bomb on like after you got the pick? Like, I get it's probably too predictable to run a run play there, but Indy's run defense is terrible. People will forget. Now, I think they were more hurt, but Malik Willis and the Packers, this is Malik Willis, ran all over them. And they knew the run was coming, and they couldn't stop. Now, granted, Willis, dynamic athlete, we understand, kind of limited quarterback, dynamic athlete, and obviously the Packers are good enough for the running game. But I did not understand that. Having said that, it feels like a passing team. I think O'Connell trusts like his concepts work. What he tells those guys is like, listen, the defense has rules. You have to figure out what the rules are. And this is, it's the why behind it, right? This is why you're doing what you're doing. This is why this concept works. And this is why, hey, Justin Jefferson, you're going to open something up for Aaron Jones. That seems insane in the passing game, but it works because Jefferson will grab 2 or 3 guys, right? And Aaron Jones has space then to operate. And I think, I mean, I don't know, long way of saying like they should be able to work around the offensive line. And I still don't totally I understand there's no really good solution right now. What I don't understand is it does seem like there's sometimes better solutions than for example, like sticking with Ingram and all this stuff. Like, I don't totally understand what the fix is for the offensive line other than maybe just run better concepts.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, I don't know. You still have Brian O'Neill. That's a good thing. And I mean, Robinson did well in his first game, but it just feels like, you got to work with what you have. And I mean, if it means a subtle switch here too, maybe it'll get things going, and maybe, just maybe, it could get you some cash on Underdog Fantasy, because Underdog is the place to play if you're a sports fan looking to win money while watching sports. With over 5 million happy players and $2 billion won, Underdog makes it fun and easy to cash in on all your favorite athletes' performances. You can compete against other players by just selecting higher or lower on 2 or more players' stats, and you could win up to 1,000 times your money. So turn every touchdown into a win at Underdog. Underdog is the best place to cash in on all of your takes this football season. Which players are going off, which ones are ice cold. You just make your entries in a few taps and turn your sports opinions into real money. Underdog has vulture protection. If you select a designated running back to score a touchdown in your pick'em entry and you get vultured, we will rescue your entry. And they also have a game known as Red Zone Rush, a game you won't find anywhere else. Just pick whether or not a player will score a touchdown by swiping right for yes or left for no. It's as simple as that. Plus, your entry will be automatically boosted, and you'll get a 51% profit boost when you play. I'm an Underdog fantasy player. I've been doing it for years, and I got in on the action last night, Tom. I knew that Matt Boldy had his most points against any opponents than
the Vikings.
Sharks. What's that?
I said, this is a Viking show.
But I mean, sometimes you have a hunch.
I
I'm just
know.
saying, you might get it while watching football. You might get it while watching a overrated hockey player that everybody thinks is a hockey god. But I picked that and I paired it with Julius Randle points and I won some money. I also did Jamar Chase higher on receiving yards and Chase Brown higher on first quarter receiving yards, which was 0.5, which was kind of weird. But hey, you're going to give it to me. I'm going to take it. You can win some cash too. Download the app today and use the code THEAGE to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. Again, download the app today and use the code THEAGE to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. Select higher or lower on your favorite players and cash in on Underdog. You must be 18 plus, 19 plus in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. If you're concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. That's 1-800-639-8783 or text NEXT STEP to 53342. And in New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. Whew. Okay,
I have one comment. This is not
Go
football related. It's very funny that in Alabama or somewhere else, Nebraska or something, it's 19 to gamble. I get from the standpoint of, it used to be I think when my mom was growing up, she's from Green Bay, Wisconsin, Packers fan. She was like, yeah, it was 19, when she was in college, I think, to drink. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. You keep it out of high schools, what at some point it sounds funny. This is a rant that doesn't matter. I shouldn't have it, but at some point it is funny that and I think of this because we have young writers, I don't know what 18 means anymore. You know what I mean? This supposed to be an adult. And I get it. Listen, I say this as someone who was not an adult when I was 24, but at some point, shouldn't you be, it's not, I guess maybe you don't want people on their phone, gambling but it doesn't matter. It's not, I get, you don't want some high school kid going to the liquor store and hooking up the sophomores or whatever, but it's not gambling is something you can pass off. You choose to download the app or whatever. So I had no idea until you read that ad that Nebraska, you're out in Omaha, you're going to Creighton, you're like, man, I can't bet on Jamar Chase. You know what I mean? Against the Ravens. You got to wait until next year. But yeah, I think that's insane. Sorry, I detracted from a football podcast, but you did this with your
but you can play high dollar fantasy football league still at 18.
Right,
in most
right,
states.
right.
It's I also wish we had sports betting throughout the country instead of just select few states, but that's okay, because when I was in Colorado, I said Anthony Edwards MVP plus 1,300. Then Cat got traded and now he's launching threes, and I don't know, he's like,
did you see Anthony Edwards' response? This is Dane Moore, former Zone comic writer, who has a really popular podcast. Did you see his response when he asked him about shooting threes?
Oh, yeah. He said, what do you think about people who think, and then he said, fuck them.
Yeah. It was very Anthony Edwards. I will say this. I think Anthony Edwards, he's obviously a big football guy. Gotta love it that he's doing the photo shoot with Justin Jefferson. It does feel like a modern pairing, kind of the Garnett Moss. It does feel like we kind of have that again. I'm not convinced, if Matt Daniels was obviously wouldn't kick or long snap, but Matt Daniels is I need a gunner, you know what I mean? Or something like that. Or I just need someone to go in there and block a punt. I think Anthony Edwards can do it. And I truly, he certainly does not lack. This is a little bit the reverse of Adam Thielen. He said this multiple parts, so it's not just me, but I actually asked him straight up. I was like, do you actually, I know he went to a lot of Wolves games when he's playing for the Vikings. And I was like, do you actually sit on the court there and go man, if I actually train, and he cut me off. He's 100%, I could play in the NBA. And part of me was why wouldn't you just go play for the Wolves instead of the Panthers? You know what I mean? I know that sounds weird, but it's it is funny to me. I know there was some talk. I mean, I don't think they need him with Naylor and stuff, but there was some talk, obviously, could you go back and get him, right? The Panthers are kind of a mess. He's playing. It's very weird that he's playing out his career, especially in Carolina, where I don't know if they know what they're doing with Bryce Young, right? And that's the ownership situation and all that. It is really weird that we're going to remember he had a few years with the Panthers. You know what I mean? And it'd be one thing if you were hey, he actually got a lot of credit for Bryce Young, breaking out or whatever. But it still seems weird. And part of me is like, man, you're getting banged up every week and playing for this kind of mess of an organization. And I was at that stadium because the Vikings, like Carolina itself is really nice, North Carolina, but the stadium is like, it's from like the 90s, and it feels very much like it's from the 90s. Like, I don't know. Part of me is like, man, you wouldn't rather just like, get minutes for the Rockets? Like, if you really could do this, you know what I mean? Like, wouldn't you want to like, imagine if he was just playing in the NBA right now. You know what I mean? Like, imagine if Adam Thielen
just shooting
truly
threes.
yeah, he's maybe with like the Detroit Pistons, but you're like, yeah, he's, actually, hey, he gets out to the wing and can kind of defend. And I don't know if he could actually do it. I do think it's so funny that these guys have that we always forget that like people are like, oh, it's Dallas Turner down on himself. I'm like, dude, I think he's just like, yeah, I'm in the NFL, man. Like, I'm sure he wants to play more, right, or whatever. But I was like, he doesn't lack confidence. You know what I mean? Dallas, you think about it, like Reichert, if a kid, imagine the pressure on you, right? It's like, hey, you got to go do this in front of, I'm trying to think, it's like 64,000 people in the stands and like all these people watching on TV, people with money on it. People, I mean, crazy people, man. Like, think of the Madison stuff, obviously went way out of bounds, but like, think of like the vitriol he got for like a phone. Imagine Reichert missing a kick, right? We saw that. And I know it was a big moment. We saw Blair Walsh looked fine for years. You know what I mean? Blair Walsh seemed fine. And, you think of like Daniel Carlson has carved out a career, and I get it's the Packers, but you have a guy coming down. And listen, like these guys, it takes a lot to kind of mess with their confidence. I always go like, man, Anthony Edwards doesn't lack confidence. Adam Thielen, I think, really does think he could play in the NBA. Like, it is just, you have to be like, I always go, if something's breaking a guy's confidence, it's often like something around them is wrong. Like, it's not the guy. It's like, it's the kind of the infrastructure. Random rant. Sorry.
Yeah, no. You brought it up, and after talking about underdog, I mean, you were talking about Will Reichert, and people, have entries on this game and everything else. I understand it. I mean, like you said, Madison stuff way out of bounds, but I understand how people get angry because I had a 5-pick entry on a college football Saturday, and all PJ Fleck needed to do was kick a field goal from the 2-yard line against USC, or the 1-yard line against USC. And he decided to go for the touchdown. Right move, because the Gophers wound up winning the game. But dragging Kesich, not kicking a field goal there may have cost me $250. I get it.
My cousin, I was talking to my cousin last night, and he has Tucker on his fantasy team, and that missed extra point. Like, I think like he's worried. I mean, I guess he doesn't know, but he's worried it's going to factor in with the with his fantasy team. So I don't know. I mean, my point there was just like, I don't know why I'm going on a Dallas Turner route other than that he's on my mind because he's not playing much. Like, I go back, like anytime you talk to him, I'm like, dude, I don't see him, like, I don't see a confidence dip. I think if you have a team that deep and you have a guy like Flores, like, your confidence dips when you're like, yeah, I think the organization doesn't know it. Like Darnold, I would get it where he'd be like, dude, I feel like I'm playing with guys, or 4 guys, I shouldn't say not his teammates, but the coaches and stuff, who don't know what they're doing. And yes, that would hurt your confidence. You're stuck. You're under contract. Like, you know what I mean? You don't get to choose where you start. And so I don't know. I do like the mentality. Okay, now O'Connell's calling his own number in some ways, but the mentality he has where he's like, the organization fails the quarterback before the quarterback fails the organization. Like, I think that's how you should, you always say point with the thumb, not the finger or whatever, right? But like, that is the right mentality. I've actually been excited to hear that, I guess, for like a better word, because I think even in a lost season like last year, they still try to kind of push it across. I mean, we can argue whether they should have done that, and certainly this year. So Vegas had them 6.5, right? And like, I think ESPN had them 6-8. Like, they're on the verge, right? Here for the wins. Yeah. Like, yes. They just didn't believe it. You know what I mean? And I actually think that's a good organization, that if you believe in Flores and you believe you brought in the right guys and, whatever, you believe Darnold's good enough. Darnold, that's going to be a, one of those like revisionist history, right? Where like people are going to go, oh, we always knew Darnold had arm strength. You knew he had pocket presence. I think it's magnified because he actually does things Kirk Cousins did poorly well, right? Like, he just has like the kind of flick the ball. I mean, not that Cousins had arm strength, but like kind of flick the ball out there, and he has good pocket presence, and he doesn't let one bad event like mess with his head. But yeah, it's like, to me, I was like, if anything, I don't know how far this team goes, but assuming they don't botch this middle of the season, they should just pick up wins. Like they should go into Jacksonville. They talked about this, right? With the think of that Indy comeback, right? Like we obviously talked about it last week. I don't know if I'm just doing my own show now. I think I'm just like rambling on topics, but
go
I
ahead. This is great.
But like think about it. Like we obviously naturally asked about that, and Westfield, like Matt Daniels doesn't want to even talk about that. This is a game that came back and won a historic game during a crazy 13-win season. Matt Daniels doesn't want to talk about it because there were special teams errors, right? And Wes Phillips, like straight up was like, yeah, we'd like to just win games sometimes. You know what I mean? Like, so they're not all nail biters and everyone's, stressed out and you have to like, Monday morning quarterback everything the next day and stuff. And like, here's your opportunity against Jacksonville, man. Like, don't rely on the kicker, man. That's not Will Reichert's not playing in this game. Like you have a guy you cut in camp, and I think pretty early on, that's your kicker. You know what I mean? And like, this is your opportunity here. There's going to be a lot of Vikings fans. I forgot about this. I have a friend who likes snowbirds. He's my age, lives in Jacksonville in the winter. I mean, people are going to be jealous of him, and then lives in St. Paul, right? In the summer when it's nice here in Minnesota. It's just more rare that someone like, my age would do that. But he is going to be one of many Vikings fans there. We also, Nelson Thielen lives nearby, one of our writers. He's going to be there. He's going to write about the experience. We have a handful, and we've always had kind of a handful of not ex-Minnesotans, because they may identify as Minnesotans still, but like people from Minnesota who moved to Florida. And in Thielen's case, he's actually a Florida State fan who loved Christian Ponder. He's the only person I think became a Vikings fan because of Christian Ponder. Dead serious. He loved Christian Ponder because he was a very good college quarterback.
Yeah.
And just became a Vikings fan. But he's driving up like 2 hours to go to Jacksonville. I think that's going to feel like a home game. The hard thing with the Rams thing is actually did feel like a home game. Their stadium doesn't, because they share it with the Chargers, doesn't have any like Rams colors, or there's nothing about it that would suggest it's the Rams stadium. It is just a football stadium that's shared by two teams in LA, right? And I think, that was kind of the shame in losing that game, is like it actually kind of felt like a home game. I think Jacksonville will. I think Nashville will, given there's a lot of people from the Midwest, including Minnesota, who move out there, including because that's a hot spot and people want to kind of make that a destination trip, right? Which makes a lot of sense, even though you're playing a pretty bad team. And even Chicago, there's going to be more Bears fans and there's excitement about that, but that's a pretty easy trip. So I do think if like this team is, the big difference to me with this team is you see the point differential, right? They're like Houston, they just piped them. You know what I mean? They should have actually with the Packers. That game was never as close as it looked, but like the way that started, they should have beaten the Colts. I mean, dude, it's crazy that game was close. They just kept killing themselves, right? It's turnovers, interceptions, the weird fumble where he gets smoked in the face. I don't know. Sam Darnold, I don't know why the league doesn't protect him, but
they don't protect anybody unless your name's Mahomes, Jordan Love, or somebody up, because Joe Burrow got smacked in the face last night and they didn't call it. But
yeah, I know. I saw that. To me, this is the opportunity. Go practice what you preach. Like, hey, Wes Phillips, you don't want to stress out. Like, let's run up some schemes. We talked about the O-line and stuff like that. Hey, Flores, like, just what's the hell out of this guy? It's Mac Jones. You know what I mean? Like, because I think Lawrence is out, right? There's no Lawrence.
Yeah, so he's highly unlikely to play, is what I've heard.
You have their left tackle. Cam Robinson was there a long time, and he's in the Vikings colors. Like, it's so funny that he showed up, and like, we've had this like nice summer, and he's like, man, it's cold here. And I was like, well, probably compared to Jacksonville, yes. But like, I think, they should go just blitz the hell out of him. Like, just absolutely, boggle his mind, man. It's Mac Jones. Like, this is a stretch where it's not just pick up wins. It should be like, make sure they're always fighting the 2016 team, because like that started 5-0. I do believe this team is just very different than that. I think they're also fighting the 13-win team from 2 years ago a little bit, where it was that we knew all along it felt like a mirage. It was weird because actually Vegas was dead on about that team, right? Like the only time they won as an underdog was the miracle catch with Jefferson. The only time they lost, of course, was their favor against the Giants, as they should have been in the first round. Vegas has had more trouble, as we know, kind of with the Vikings, especially in the early season, reasonably so. But like, this is kind of the prove it moment. This is like how far away are the Lions? Remember, you lost that by a point, right? Or whatever. Like, I think this is the prove it moment. I know you're not playing great teams or whatever, but just go pipe them. Like, make this easy. You know what I mean? Don't turn the ball over. Run the hell out of it. Like with that Akers thing. Like, what? Akers was ripping off yards late in that game, and then they started throwing again. And I'm like, yeah, just give the ball to Akers. Like, they're not stopping him. You know, like this. If they're not guarding Justin Jefferson, just throw it to Jefferson every play. Like, I think this comes down to, like, I get no one wants, it was controversial when, like, the Detroit kind of just was toying with the Cowboys, right? And our old friend Mike Zimmer, like, hey, I'm not saying be mean, but, like, smoke these teams. Like, actually, you know what I mean? Like, that we're at the part of the season, just smoke them, because I think that will give people confidence, whether it's in the building where they've had a lot of confidence all along, or outside the building where everyone's skeptical because it's the Vikings. Like, give people reason to believe you're going to beat Green Bay, right? Give people reason to believe that's going to be a game. I know it's in Detroit. I know Detroit's good. Dan Campbell, who is like Chris Schad on steroids, maybe literally, like that is.
I don't drink that much coffee, but go ahead.
That's right. That's right. I think the point is, like, give people reason to believe that you can win these games, right? It's funny. They're going to be an underdog no matter what the record is at the end of the season. And I think if we look back and go, yeah, the slip up was against one of the best offensive coordinators in the league, one of the most underrated quarterbacks. I know we both know Collar. Collar has always said this. He bets on Goff because people just think he sucks, and he's fine. He works within that system. It's weird that trade kind of worked out, but it worked out. And Stafford, it's funny, it's Goff and Stafford, but, like, Stafford's a smart quarterback. Like, he knew how to avoid that pressure, right? And I just look at it in that, like, yes, you shouldn't be down, against the Rams, like, trying to scramble back in the 2-win team, all that. But that was a 2-win team. They had just gotten Puka and cut back. So if those are kind of two losses, those are losses you'd accept, for lack of a better word. There's none of those coming up here, right? You know what I mean? Until you get late in the season. And I just don't make a contest. Don't make Parker Romo hit a field goal to beat Jacksonville. You know what I mean? Go just obliterate these guys. They're not very good.
I love my wrestling references, so I'll make one here based off a former Viking, Roman Reigns. Smash them, stack them, and pin them. I don't think you can actually pin a football team, but smash them and stack them is pretty much the motto they should do, because you take on Jacksonville without Trevor Lawrence on Sunday. They're 2-7. You go to Nashville, which will probably be another large Viking contingent, and you'll maybe face the walking meme machine, Will Levis. That should be a win. And then you head to Chicago for a Bears team who they are who we thought they were. Over the last 2 weeks, they haven't been able to get anything going. They have the offensive talent. They just don't have the coaching. They're 3 winnable games here. And if you don't, you're probably on that 2007 Giants path, or whatever season it was they won the Super Bowl, that the Wolves get giddy about because they grew up Lions fans. Just very quickly, because we're running out of time, though, Vikings and Jaguars, noon kickoff, Everbank Field in Jacksonville. Adam Amin, Mark Sanchez will be on the call for Fox. The Vikings are favored by a touchdown because Trevor Lawrence is unlikely to play with a shoulder injury. And as we mentioned, Matt Jones, he shredded the Vikings last time he played them on Thanksgiving 2022, but Ed Donatel was running that defense. It's going to be a little bit harder for Mac Jones on Sunday. Give me your prediction for Sunday's game. What are you thinking? Vikings, Jaguars.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to find an over-under because that usually just tells you, like, how many points are going to be scored, right? And, like, and I was searching this as you were talking. I think it should be like a 31-14 game or something. I mean, I think you could question, like, how they'd actually score 14 points. You know what I mean?
Action Network has the over-under at 43.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I'm trying to think of, like, how you would kind of add that up, like 30-13, something like that.
Yeah,
kind of right. Like, you have some field goals on there or something. I don't know, but, like, it's so funny that this is a test, but it is, like, you almost like, sometimes I call it, like, the Vegas test, right? Do you beat the odds Vegas sets for you? Like, a 7 is right? The line is always right, but it almost seems like you could see it be 8 and 9 or whatever. I would say this. I think actually Mac Jones is a pretty good backup, right? In terms of, there are more random players who would step in as a backup. I think, honestly, you'd think, like, the Vikings would maybe take him. I actually feel like that's almost like an O'Connell guy for some reason. Coached in college or something, came from New England, but, like, I don't think it should be discounted. Like, if you don't blitz him relentlessly, or you just make it too obvious where the pressure is coming from, Mac Jones will figure it out. But you should be able to do it in a complicated way as in like complicated way for Mac Jones that you can beat him. And I think just offensively, this team, as much as I actually think Hawkinson came back, and I know he only played 45% of snaps, I think he only had 27 yards. It did feel like the offense opened up. I know he wasn't on the field half the time, but it did feel like all of a sudden Addison. I think it was really smart that O'Connell, instead of pushing back on Addison, it was just like, yeah, I'll write some catches in for the script, right? Like, let's not turn the. I don't think O'Connell wants to be fighting with Addison and his dad. You know what I mean, or whatever. And I think they could use kind of a cleansing game, meaning like Addison, as a few catches, racks up some yardage. Justin Jefferson vintage game. Hawkinson, kind of, this is a game where you feel like, hey, he's healthy and back. Not that you didn't after the last one, but like Hawkinson looks like the player he was pre-injury, and remember, pretty substantial injury. I think it was encouraging to see guys like Oliver, like Akers. And I don't know if everyone's going to be as productive. I'd be shocked if Oliver has like the same game, but yeah, I think you should look at it as like, this is the cleansing game. Like this is one where you go out and beat them, and I make the Vikings fans there loud and yeah. So to me, it's like, I guess I'm creating stakes for a game that shouldn't have stakes, but the stakes behind this are like, don't have the Colts game again. Because the problem is, if you keep doing that, you could actually probably like get through the season, but Arizona could beat you, Atlanta could beat you. You're not giving anyone confidence that you'd beat like the Packers or Lions. Like, to me, go out and have a cleanse. Like go. Yeah, it's weird in Jacksonville of all places to go to have a cleanse, but like, go have a cleansing game where you feel good coming out of it. It's not just a win, but you're like, man, Addison looks like old school Addison. Hawkinson looks healthy again. Keep Aaron Jones out of the game, meaning I love him. He's great. Don't expose him to injury. Like Cam Akers should be able to run against Jacksonville. So yeah, a really interesting one. It actually feels like an old school Lions matchup, right? Back when the Lions were bad, and you're like, please just don't like make this interesting. That actually is what this feels like a lot.
Yeah, very much. I have the Vikings 27, Jaguars 10. That was before looking at the over under, but that sounds about right. I don't. Jacksonville on offense doesn't really have a lot. Even with, I think Brian Thomas is banged up right now too, and that's probably their top receiving weapon. Unless Evan Ingram's going to beat you, I just don't see how the Vikings lose this game, especially with the home contingent. Wrapping up here very quickly, what's going on at zone coverage?
Yeah, zone coverage, daily content on the Vikings, Twins, Wolves, Wild. Right now, my latest piece is Minnesota's biggest deadline pickup. Wasn't a deadline pickup. I kind of talked about this, why I'm a big fan of the trade for Akers and why I think it really, really matters. Cam Robinson, also pretty good pickup. But yeah, just daily content on the Vikings. Kind of some early week is always looking back, kind of trying to explain the game that just happened. Looking forward, late in the week, obviously a lot of stuff with the Jacksonville matchup. It is a little harder to really like drum up anything for it, right? It's a little different when it's like Ben Johnson and Brian Flores, or it's McVay versus O'Connell or whatever. But I think we should remember Peterson, the coach, has a lot to prove. Super Bowl winning quarterback, a lot of expectations, I believe, in Jacksonville relative to what you'd expect from the Jaguars and kind of the season they're having. And yeah, I do think you still learn something about the Vikings. It's different than going against like a big matchup. But what it is just like, did they learn from the Colts game? It can be as simple as that. That should have been a larger margin, should not have been as interesting as it was. Hey, let's kind of make up for that, for lack of a better word, better effort here against Jacksonville, clean some things up. We saw pre-snap penalties went away. That was great. We saw not taking care of the ball. That's the next step offensively and defensively, is just blitz relentlessly. Don't let them know where it's coming. Maybe Cashman gets a pick or something coming back.
So this has been the Viking Age podcast. He is Tom Schreier at TSchreier3. I am Chris Schad at The Real Chris Schad. We do this every Monday with a late week episode right here on the Viking Age YouTube channel. We're also in podcast form on Apple and Spotify the very next day. But however you consume us, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe so you never miss a new episode. We can spread the word to the masses. For Tom Schreier, I am Chris Schad. This has been the Viking Age podcast.